NASCAR banned the Confederate flag from its sites. Now it did so because its one black rider, one black racer, Bubba Wallace, asked them, this gentleman, asked them to do so. Now, seeing as George Floyd was murdered by cops, and seeing as a million people were out in the streets in every state, and seeing that Black Lives Matter, for the most part, has started to get public approval, where the majority of the public says, okay, fair enough, we agree. We need to do something with this black thing. And you have another part of the public that says, oh, you know what, we also agree that the cops are kind of a problem. We also agree that the cops are biased towards blacks. And we agree 80% with the protests. The thing that happened to Floyd was disgusting. Protests over it. Now, that is a phenomenal change of point of view. And because of such, you've had companies like, what is the syrup? I can't think of her name. I can't think of it. Aunt Jemima. It was like, yes, that's racist. So, we finally recognize that. It's one of those type of things where all of a sudden people come to some kind of realization that, yes, that character in blackface probably wasn't the best. Well, in this case, NASCAR came to Jesus also, and they banned the Confederate flag. Great. Who's going to be against a band of Confederates who tried to take down the United States government for the right to hold other human beings in horrible, vicious servitude? Who would be against that? Of course, there's not going to be any. Yes, there's going to be people against that. You had a guy flying a flag, Confederate flag, over the site at one of the races. But you also had a noose placed in Bubba Wallace's station. I suppose you're gonna have some people. I suppose you're gonna have some people who are always against whatever you try to push for. But just for one moment, consider what you are pushing for. I've heard people make this argument to me that this is heritage. But what is your heritage? If you had somebody who was living in the German Reich and said, yeah, that was our heritage to hold Jews that way, you would think that was utterly abysmal and insane. And yet, they would say that in the United States. Like, again, I made the point before, we like our monsters. And our monsters don't necessarily seem like monsters to us. Well, same thing in the South. In Richmond, Virginia, you have Confederate statues all over the place. When you're living there and you're driving past that stuff, it doesn't necessarily entirely sink in because you've so normalized to the fact that that stuff is there. I'm saying that from a historical standpoint and the way that people identify with where they are, they do the same thing. The catch is, on some level, you need to be able to unmoor yourself from that and to be able to look at that in some part from the other person's perspective and realize that the history that you love so much was not all that great for other people. It's a flat fact. The Confederates were a band of terrorists who tried to topple the United States government for the right to hold slaves. Whatever you want to cast it as beyond that point, that part is infinitely true. And as such, if you are going to make the statement for that, and you're going to put a noose in his particular booth, his garage, then I'm going to say there's a racist element that is somewhere in NASCAR that needs to be rooted out. Especially if you're going to put a threat against his life like that, which is exactly what that noose symbolizes. I'm going to give you NASCAR's statement on this. They seem to be taking this pretty seriously. And I kind of want to talk about why. Because I think this is the intersection between capitalism and race. In a, oddly enough, potentially positive way. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. So NASCAR puts out a pretty strongly worded statement on this. Late this afternoon, NASCAR was made aware of that a noose was found in the garage stall of 43 team. We are angry and outraged and cannot strongly state enough how seriously we take this heinous act. We have launched an immediate investigation and will do everything we can to identify the person or persons responsible and eliminate them from the sport. As we have unequivocally stated, I inverted those, but same thing. There is no place for racism in NASCAR, and this act only strengthens our resolve to make the sport open and welcoming to all. Wow, that is a statement. That statement could have only gotten stronger as if you added a F-bomb. If they would have just had a fuck in there somewhere. The only way you could have made that statement stronger. Me, personally, I like that statement. That is not going to make me watch that sport anymore because it's sort of boring as can be. However, for the people that do like it, NASCAR, I would imagine, if it had the opportunity, there are 13% of blacks in this country, and none of them watch NASCAR. I'm being hyperbolic, but that not very far. So if you're NASCAR and you're looking to expand your base of support, where do you go? You got Bubba Wallace. Is it possible that black attracts black? Can Bubba Wallace mix the sport something that we can get that good juice of African Americans flowing in our sport? And we can't do that if you're fucking it up with the Confederate flag. Now, it's possible that Floyd or George Floyd's death had a come to Jesus moment for the nation where various aspects of the nation started thinking real honestly about civil rights and what it doesn't mean to be kind of integrated in real terms, not just this kind of people together and whatnot. That's very possible, especially in the context of sports and whatnot. But I would say there is a fiscal incentive in NASCAR doing this. And that fiscal incentive, I would imagine, ran up against this notion of just NASCAR culture of sorts. And I don't mean that in poor terms. I just mean that in the sense that that is not necessarily seen as a sport that African Americans watch. And if NASCAR was going to go anywhere in regards to trying to get support, you got Bubba Wallace. He's black. He has a race car. Can you get support? Look, I'm not undermining their statement. Their statement is what it is. So don't misunderstand me. I'm saying a company, like any other company, highest priority is profit. And NASCAR's highest priority, like any other company, is profit. The stupid human trick that they use to get that profit, well, that's whatever. But in this very specific case, the superhuman trick that they use to get that profit is race cars and having eyes on those race cars. And they know they have a large demographic of people, consumers, that don't purchase their product. And they have a guy who may be able to do so. Especially with the headline, "We are removing the Confederate flag." Look, I wish I could be sympathetic to people who hold on to this notion of Confederate pride or whatever. I'm sorry, I can't. I don't, like, in real terms, it's what are you actually supporting on this? And the notion that you could somehow delineate, yes, they were brutal fascists that wanted to keep human beings subjugated as slaves and basically rape the women and whatnot. But I'm just doing this for pride. What? Fucking same thing. When people are pulling down those statues, I hope you understand that they're not pulling down those statues to denigrate quote-unquote American heritage because, again, these were a band of terrorists that were trying to take down America. I don't want to beat that horse too strongly, but they themselves have associated the Confederate flag with direct racist intent. I mean, they just put a noose around the guy's thing. And a lot of this has to do, again, with the removal of the Confederate flag. Those things are related to one another. They may see this as a black thing. And however NASCAR sees this, I suppose NASCAR is looking at this as somewhat of a business thing. You are fucking up our business interests. And yeah, the black thing too. But you're fucking up our business interests. Again, not undermining. Not undermining. NASA's response is strong. I suppose in anything that you do, you're going to get pushback. It's just unfortunate, that's all. I suppose there was only one Noose. That's positive. I mean, considering, again, this is not necessarily a sport we found ourselves all that welcome. But Bubba Wallace is in it, so we'll see what happens. I would not be surprised at all if NASCAR is somehow making some kind of pitch to the African American community in order to try to ingratiate themselves or to expand into that demographic, using Wallace as somewhat of a conduit to do so. But, like many of the other organizations that was basically trying to remove what they would consider to be racial symbols. Washington Redskins, here's looking at you. The Young Turks, here's looking at you. If NASCAR is willing to take down their Confederate flag, and then, the Young Turks, who's named after genocide, or, maybe, or a group that committed a genocide, maybe should have a look at that. And the Washington Redskins with a brutally racist name, maybe you should take a look at that also. But shout out to NASCAR for not taking any shit on this particular issue. Like,